right, let's go ahead and start. Guys, thanks so much. We have 2 more weeks of this. For those who cannot wait for it to be over with, you have 2 more weeks of this, and we start small group. Our small group lessons that we will start on, well, you'll get the books, you'll get into your groups on August 12th. It is going to be 1 Timothy, and it will be Titus. It's called Fighting the Good Fight. It'll be great. It's got 12 lessons. It'll go from here all the way to Thanksgiving, and we'll be doing that all the way from here to there. It is very easy. If you've never been a part of this before, or you've never done one of our John Stott Bible studies, it's incredibly easy. You basically just read it, and you answer the questions. It kind of guides you through every single piece. It is super, super simple. It's a lot of fun. A lot of our people, and again, we won't teach it. You will teach it. You'll teach it with each other. And the way we do it with groups is we don't ever want one person to be in charge of a whole group. That's just too much, and then sometimes you have to miss. So we always want like 2 or 3 people working together. Now, like I said last week, some of y'all are you're just as committed to your Wednesday night small groups than you are just to your Connect group classes. Some of you are absolutely in love with it, where y'all hang out with them, you spend time with them. I had 3 or 4 ladies already tell me, "You're not changing my group." I go, "I didn't even pick your group. You can do whatever you want. I'm not here to change your group." So you can get into the groups that you want to get into. I'll give you locations. So all I'll do is I'll tell you where you'll go to. If you've not been to the next building, which all of you go to Connect Group this week, next door, you know how there's a big class right when you get down in this hallway? That's where Billy Harris's class. Well, next to that, there's another class that a wall has been knocked down. So now there's 2 big classes back to back. And that'll be John Jackson's Sunday school classroom. But what we'll be able to do is that's where I hope to have 1 ladies class, 1 ladies class, and then probably another ladies class at the end. I know right now I have around 3 women's classes. I have about 2 men's classes. That's usually about normal. But the way all these always work, here's how it always works. We have this giant influx of people who show up all in the first 2 or 3 weeks, and then it slowly kind of trickles off. It's not because they're bad teachers, it's not because it's just people forget and get busy and things like that. So no one ever take an offense when people kind of drift away from things like that. But we will do this all the way to Thanksgiving. We do have an Operation Christmas Child Week that we'll do in the middle of that, so there will be a little bit of break there. We also are going to schedule. Everyone told me, they go, "Man, we want to do the kickball night again." We enjoyed doing the kickball night. It was amazing. You remember it was supposed to storm big time. It stormed everywhere but here. And so they want to do it again. And I go, "Can we not do it in August?" And they said, "It's a great idea." So we have it scheduled for November. We could move that. It's a very flexible date. I could move that and actually make one of your small groups actually last 1 more week. But it will either happen on November 18th or it'll happen a little bit before that, just depending on weather and just seeing what's going on. Because I don't know about you, but post-Halloween, you don't have a clue what the weather will be like. Most likely it'll be fair, but there's a great chance there's also a chance where it could be crazy, rainy, or stormy. And so you really never know. We have 2 more weeks of this. Today we're doing the 1800s. Next week we'll do the 1900s. The 1800s, this is probably the most shaping of all of your beliefs and what you believe in Jesus, how you grew up, what kind of church you grew up into. Old church music. What is it called? I can't remember how they said it, but there was a way that what it is this constant, the way things used to be. And this would have been back, so if you think about this, we ended last week with explaining what is going to change. So we talked about the Age of Enlightenment. We talked about the American Revolution. And I want you to really think about the American Revolution. It's a giant experiment. Will all of this democracy, will this without a king, will this actually work? And what's funny about this is that I'd probably say for a good so many years, they did not know. In the 1800s, I'm just going to remind you of things that happened, okay? You have the War of 1812. Right? British comes back, says, "Hey, let's have round 2." And they're ready to come. And what do? They come and invade Washington, D.C. They burn the White House to the ground. We lose a lot of documents and things in that time period. And then they come, the Battle of New Orleans, and that's where the Star-Spangled Banner was made, and all the things that we have that's happened in that time. And then we start doing a westward expansion. See, we start going from East Coast and we're trying to get to West Coast. So in this time, and I want you to kind of think, this is really the Wild West. The Wild West, we're going to get the Civil War that will be in this time period, and we're going to have a little bit of industry. You're going to be seeing how we're just banging on the door of the Industrial Revolution because railroads are going from East Coast to West Coast. There's one major railroad right through the heart of America, and then you'll see, you think about it, like the very early part of 800s, going to have the Lewis and Clark, and you have the gold rush that will happen because of what they find and what they do, and you have all this stuff. Think about it, Texas is founded at this time, during this time. Everything kind of starts. So if you were to say, what is the heart of what people believed in this time period, or even the heart of what created Texas, especially where we are, it's the 1800s. I think the 1800s and the early 1900s to World War II, so I'd say about maybe a 100-year gap. So if you say about 1850 to 1950, this is what made America great, is these two periods, is what happened from 1850 all the way here. Now, what helped during this time period is Napoleon was basically invading most of all of Europe. It kept Europe occupied. It kept people occupied. What did he sell us? He sold us the Louisiana Purchase, right? Sold us the Louisiana Purchase. Anybody remember how much for? How much was the Louisiana Purchase? Wasn't it like 28 million? What was it? Was it like something like that?
3 cents an acre.
Yeah, it was like barely anything. And I always think about these football players that get paid like $20 million a year, and I'm going, it's one Louisiana Purchase. That's Louisiana. And so you think about this, this kind of blows your mind. So again, I titled it the United and the Divided Christian America. Now, what did I say last week about what united America? What unites America? Money. And it did. The commerce of money is what united the colonies, put the colonies together so they would rise up against Great Britain because they were taxing them. They were asking for taxation. Now, I do believe that everything that's based on our founding fathers, I believe theism is all through it. I believe the Christian God is all through it. But I also believe that the trickling of the Enlightenment is still there because a lot of these men were educated in this time frame. And so the Enlightenment is where we're going to see a lot of the anti-God slogans and a lot of anti-God ideas. So if we think about it, and you look at your paper, we have the very top paper. The top of your paper just has very simple, true facts. It would say Christianity in this period was shaped by revivalism. And again, revivalism, and I got to kind of explain what that is. We know revivals, but we need to understand what revivalism is. Western expansion, slavery, immigration, the Civil War, and the rise of new religious groups. The century produced great religious energy, but it also created doctrinal weakness, cultural compromise, and new sects of Christianity. You think about it, we have, like I said, the railroad. You have the immigrants that are going to come in. You have all this happening in this time period. In this time period, the North is going to be very, very, very multiply diverse. The South is not. It's going to be mostly predominantly white, mostly stronger in a Southern type of atmosphere. And that's what it means. The South begins. It turns into the South because of how different it becomes from the North. And the North and the South actually start to be two different places. We find the gold rush when they find the gold in California. We remember the Western trails. We see the buffalo. We think about Indians. We think about how towns look like this. Towns were made out of wood. John and I were just talking about this. We think about the towns. They were one place after the next place after the next place, and they were all wood, 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 wood from one place to the other side. England was also this way. It burnt. The city of London burnt down multiple times because there was so much wood. And you can't go to England and build a structure without making it out of stone, even today. But what's wild about this is that these people, they created these towns as fast as they could, and they built it out of whatever material they had. They didn't have brick. They didn't have masonry stuff. But as the cities were developed, then those cities then would turn into masonry stuff, like New York City and multiple places like that. And so things changed. And so think about this. The United States in 1783, so this is after American Revolution. This is 1803, Louisiana Purchase. 1845, you have Texas and all of its little thing up there. And then you have the Mexican secession, you have the Gadsden Purchase, and then you have the Oregon Country. So this is 1846, 1848, and 1853. So I kind of need you to understand this is the layout of where we are. So we actually don't get all of this here until about, 1853, 1850-ish is when we actually become the major America that we actually are today. Now again, that doesn't include Hawaii or Alaska. So in that, during this time, we had something called the Second Great Awakening. Now, if you remember, the First Great Awakening was after the colonial people got here. A couple of the generations, we said, kind of died off. And after those generations, some of them were rebellious, and they changed. Second Great Awakening is not quite the same. Second Great Awakening is, can we create a revival the way that they did in the First Great Awakening? Now, and I'm going to say this as nicely as I can because some people get upset with me. I'm not picking on anyone or any person. I'm just telling, you can read a book if you don't believe me. I'm just telling you what I've read in the books. So if you get upset and go, I don't believe it, okay, fine, don't. Read the book. So in the Second Great Awakening, it was Protestant revival movement in the late 1800s and the early 1900s, centuries. When they say centuries, remember it's the one before it, so it's actually the 1700s and the 1800s. The spread especially through the frontier regions of Tennessee, Kentucky, and Western New York, okay? Western New York, most of the time, is the Rochester area. And that area is where it mainly would be coming from. Rochester was a very, very center of most of the revival theology, and we'll talk more about that in just a minute. Kentucky was too. There were a lot of the Kentucky revivalist things that actually happened there. That's where you'll see things like, more like this. This would be more the Kentucky point of view. Ooh, I didn't know I could do that. That's more the Kentucky point of view. This is more the Rochester would be point of view. And what would happen here is we saw something that kind of changed in the way they preached. They preached definitely differently. The revival meetings, the camp meetings, and the very, very excited preachers helped carry this movement. The movement increased church attendance and produced many conversions. It was also mission work, reform movements, and new church growth. It was all about, and I want you to think about this, revival, or this idea of the Second Great Awakening was, how are we going to spread the good news to this new land, to these new people, to these new towns, to this new spot, and how are we going to do it? And what happens here is it starts to create a completely different idea of what Christianity is on the forefront. And I really want you to ask your question, and this is sometimes we have this. Every one of this room has had pastors in our past. Maybe especially when the people who are older in this room, people who you maybe younger, when you were younger, think about the pastors you had. Some of them were absolute hellfire and brimstone. Some of them were, trying to do their best to try to push people down this aisle, and you knew how good the sermon was based on how many people walked an aisle. We are the only country that does that. We have created a revival movement throughout the world, but revivalism, the idea of walking an aisle, the idea of coming to the altar, this is where it begins. It never happened before this. There is no revival where you walk an aisle and pray a prayer and you see these sinners' prayer. So what starts to happen in this Second Great Awakening is revivalism starts to become systematic. We can make it happen. In the First Great Awakening, multiple writers would write this, and this is how they wrote it, especially Ian Murray. Ian Murray would write it that the First Great Awakening was God's work. The Second Great Awakening was man's work trying to make it happen. Because we were doing our best to create morality. Because if they're Christians, they're moral. If they can follow the Bible, they'll be good. We can tame the Wild West with the gospel, but not really the gospel, more with morality. And we became this moral police more than we actually became. So as a pastor, this changes the way you preach. This changes the way you develop anything that you're going to teach on. Again, before this, the pastors would sit there and a pastor was someone that shepherded you. that showed you, and we'll talk about that. I have that in this lesson. So we go in this second great awakening is what it's called. You start seeing these things, and we have this fun man named Charles Finney. Charles Finney is a hero to very many. He preached out of Rochester, New York. They actually have a big giant statue of him there. And the church I believe that he preached out of actually is still standing today. But in this time, this was called revivalism. Revivalism emphasized emotional preaching, immediate public response. Charles G. Finney became one of the most well-known revival preachers in the era. Finney helped develop the revival system that emphasized producing decisions and measuring success by visible conversions. He promoted something called the anxious seat, or some people would say it's the sinner's chair. Wasn't able to find a really good picture of it, but what it is, it's basically a bench. And those who you would ask to come to church who have never been to church, or maybe are the town sinner, maybe the town drunk, or the person who maybe just got in trouble with some kind of thing that they just did, they would be asked to sit in the anxious seat. And Charles Finney would preach at them until they would give their life to the Lord, and that would be pushed and pushed and pushed. They preached hellfire and brimstone. Whatever emotional tactic it took, Charles Finney was incredibly, incredibly persuasive. How we know this is because he wrote a book about it. He wrote a book called Revivals of Religion. It's in my office if you want it. And I find it fun to be able to take quotes from it. But what's wild from that is that Charles Finney basically said, we can create revivals. We can make decisions. All we got to do is get these pastors, train them up how to go all across the nation. And what we need to do is get them to go have these types of revivals. And those types of revivals will get decisions, get Christians, get people made, get things made. We then can save the world. Listen to me. Great intentions, but so man-centered. Not centered that God is the one that leads us, God's the one that does, but they were lit on fire for these things. And so if we think about it, you maybe had a pastor that was this way. Maybe had a pastor that was absolutely, this is what it is, and you're a sinner, and you're going to hell, and all these things of the sort. And instead of, we're all sinners. We're all broken. You know what I mean? And that's a different point of view. What happens in this kind of society is that the pastor is elevated to this almost closer to God type of, because he's this mouthpiece that is God, that is telling you, you need to be this, you need to do this, you need to do this. And so Christianity was definitely shaped in this 1800s by revivalism. We can think about it in our own lives. I remember my church had revivals, and they were terrific. I remember having those revivals. We would go and we would share around town. We would maybe even go door to door, which is scary today. But to go door to door and invite people to your revival. And, you would get people who would come, and they would come. And you'd have people who'd give their life to the Lord. We even had we had our coaching staff at our high school come to ours one time, and they came, and it really did radically change. And I'm not saying God can't use revivals. It's almost like a revival is like trying their best to have, and this is what happens. The model of that type of revivalism is technically what youth camp is run off of. When you go to youth camp, you take them and you have a little devotional at the beginning of the day. You wear them out with games and tired. You make them exhausted. You make them have feelings and they're tired. You put them in a cold, dark room after they've been hot all day. And then you preach this really emotionally charged thing or message. And then that is what draws them to maybe I need to make a decision. Now again, and your staff is very well trained in this, because even when it comes down to we don't want to try to talk someone into believing. If it's just that you became a believer and make a decision in this room, and then you walk out this room and like nothing happens, that's not true belief. That's fake. So what happened in this time period is that church more or less became a show. And it was a very professional show. It was very much of sometimes even a theatrical idea. Which again, that doesn't start until about the 1900s, because there's still one group that we haven't spoken about. And that's Pentecostalism. Pentecostalism doesn't start until the very beginning of the 1900s. So think about how that kind of will affect the future events of this. And then there will be people who go, well, that's all fake and phony, and I hate God, and I hate Jesus, and I hate the church, and it's nothing real, and everybody, and all these pastors, they're all fallible, and they're all a mess. Still to this day, I've heard people, even on podcasts, say, why are you not a Christian? You believe in all these things. And they go, because I believe that there are so many people who are, I think it was Tucker Carlson that actually said it even the other day. He even said, I don't attend any church because I believe that I don't believe in the Jesus that they preach because there's so many pastors that are so wicked and bad and they just steal, they have sexual abusing people, they're doing all these things. And he's taking this very big, broad stroke and saying that all pastors are this way. But he only hears of just, this corrupt few. The truth is, there are more corrupt people out there. Bobby and I have talked about how there should be a system that should actually follow pastors around, just like it does teachers. Like it should follow them around so they can't just go do the bad thing all over and over again. And I totally believe that. But in this time period, it was all about persuasion. It was all about, can we create things like this? And so you can see how things like this will change. It's pretty wild. Many Christians believe that this style created quick decisions without enough theology, discipleship, or even pastoral grounding. The revival culture often valued visible results more than careful doctrinal formation. So the question is, I need to get saved. Listen to me, that's great. But it's the idea is that what do we do next with them? And we see this that happened, and this morphed into the 1900 church, is that we were so good at getting, or our job was to try to get people to make decisions, but then after that we were like, okay, now what? We have to disciple them. We have to teach them the ways of the Lord. We have to teach them. What we have now is an America that's completely biblically illiterate, doesn't know their Bible, doesn't know how to have a devotional, doesn't have a prayer life, doesn't really love the Lord. They just love the action of what church is. It's like a show again. I showed up. I listened to the pastor. I sang the songs, but I have no true devotion to God. And so that's the idea of really what needs to, and that's the things that need to actually really come. We live actually in one of the hardest places to do this. If you want to talk about a place that's really hard to share the gospel, it's the Bible Belt. The Bible Belt is probably the hardest place to share the gospel because you know why? People believe that everyone here is a Christian. Or, I know about the Jesus thing. I know about Jesus, but I don't know Jesus. And that's where we have the Bible Belt. The Bible Belt is this main red area here. This is actually a very current stat. This is from 2012. And this is what denomination people are. Southern Baptist Convention is mainly this red area right here. The purple is going to be your Catholicism. You'll see right here, this is the Mormon area, where these counties, this is what was mostly the people in their predominant area. And I say this because I think this is a good illustration, is that this is most of the Bible Belt. This is where people say that they believe and they have a more secure relationship with God. As you go up north, you'll see as it gets more Catholic, they're going to be the ones that struggle with the doctrinal things. This is where good doctrine actually started. The immigrants came and they brought the Catholicism. And we'll see this as we see in just a minute. We'll talk about how a lot of the immigrants brought in their own denominations. And like I said, there was only one colony that was Maryland, was Catholic. But there were so many immigrants that came that these are the things that actually started to change our nation. Over here, completely solid. Mostly not going to be from the Bible Belt region. Why? There's going to be more of a liberal ideas. And that's the reason why most of this side over here will be this way. I always find these things fascinating because I always find it that look how they kind of have morphed and look what's really shaping us as America. But like I said, what's funny is that these people right here know Jesus, know about him, but do they know him? That's why I say it's one of the hardest places probably in the entire all of America, or maybe even the world, to actually share the gospel because, oh, yeah, I know all about Jesus. Yeah, I got that. They don't have a really relationship with him. And especially when you start to look around. So the Bible Belt was developed over time. It was a place where the gospel was spread, where people knew who Jesus was and what he was all about. It shaped the frontier expansion, the revival preaching, and the growth of Baptist and Methodist influence. Those were probably the two biggest Methodists in the Protestant movement. That's true even from the American Revolution. Those were the two that did the most. It was from Wesley, and then it was the Baptists that came from, remember, Rhode Island. And then from Rhode Island, it then morphed down to the south and then it started to catch on more and more and more. So the South became known for a strong Protestant church life and public religion. The Bible Belt cannot be understood apart from the regions of the social and political history. So if I was to ask you, why does this matter? Because this is a 2012. But if I was to ask you, which states were on the north side and which states were on the south side of the Civil War? Right there. Mason-Dixon line, right? So this is the South. These are the people who held slaves. These were the people who wanted to free slaves. And so there's a big thing that's going on here. This is actually still a moral dilemma. And I don't know if this is going to, and listen to me, I believe racism is not, I think racism is completely generated by the media. I think the media plays it like a fiddle. But it can, because people who live up here think everyone down here is still racist. And that's why we can never be that way, ever be that way. And so this is Old North Street, North Church. This church would have been built around in the 1800s. So this is the church is what it would look like. This is one that was built. This is a famous church. I believe it's in Massachusetts. And these are the things that, like, this is what a church would look like. They were just small little buildings. They weren't that much like it, when it came down to these big monstrosity things that we have now. They are completely different. So we have slavery. So I think it's a good bridge. You think about it, the Bible Belt, where the gospel is, where the gospel was, and the gospel is today. We are the ones that actually we supported slavery. This is your red would be the South, and north would be your blue with your California. This is the votes when it came down to which ones would be slave, which one wouldn't, and it changed over time from 1789 all the way to 1858, and it was 15 to 17, and one side to the other side, and they started to have this struggle and this fight. But think about this. This is not just if this side is supposed to be more believing in the Lord, this one's not, well, then how did they believe in something like this? And I think this is important that we explain to your kids, because when they hear the Civil War through their Civil War school books, they paint it in such a bad light. I don't believe the way school books are written. I believe they're written from someone who's not an American. And so be very careful when your kids read especially their own school books. Look what it says. It says slavery had a major effect on the Southern Christianity. American slavery was just different. And I want you to understand, what happens in this time, pastors are the ones that's promoting slavery. I'll say it again. Pastors are the one that's promoting slavery. Why? Because it's in the Bible. And that becomes very hard. So there was slavery, even almost like right there at the beginning of the American Revolution to the South. John and I were talking about how most of the time the people who were slave traders were not actually white men. They actually were their own African people who were taking people by the hundreds and actually putting them on boats and then sending them over and selling their own people. They don't paint that picture. There's no one who draws that picture. That's what's funny. I look for that picture all day long, John. There never is that picture. But what's funny is that's what came from that, is that we had this slave trade. These people were very, they used the Indies, the West Indies, they used the islands, like Haiti and things, where they actually would bring them, put them there, sell them from there into America. And they would use that as a skipping stone. And so that's why sometimes even for Haiti and for the Dominican Republic, there's a lot of mixed nationalities that are all from there just because of that one reason. I always find that very, very fascinating. The second one, many white churches accommodated slavery and defended it theologically. The Southern religion often tied social order, regional identity, and political opinion. Ministers often helped shape public thought about slavery and morality, and the religious life of the South was therefore both active and deeply compromised. Okay, so what made us united? Money, commerce. What made us divided? If you tell me that you're going to take my slaves, you're going to mess up my money and my commerce. So think about it. The same thing that makes us united in the American Revolution is actually the same thing that makes us divided in the Civil War. It's the same exact topic. Because it doesn't matter. You're going to take the way we do it in the South, and you're going to tell us that it's different. Now, in this time period, and I wish I had a whole section about this, but I didn't have time. It would have took too much time. I wanted to explain to you what happened in England. In England, England was a very, very high in the slave trade. They were they owned the seas. They were the ones that could transport whatever they wanted to all the way across the world. And England, at this time, started to have a more of a moral compass. I think I told you a story this before of John Newton. We got to go to John Newton's church. John Newton was a pastor. John Newton's the man who wrote Amazing Grace. John Newton wrote this thing. We actually got to go to his church, see the pulpit he was in, and this man explained it so beautifully that John Newton was a slave trader. He actually was a man who used to get slaves, and he used to sell slaves, and then God broke his heart, and he then became a pastor. He becomes a pastor, and I don't know if you understand where John Newton's church is. John Newton's church is right in front of like our Wall Street. London has its own Wall Street, and where all the trading and all the money is made in their city, and his church sat right in front of it. Where his church sits, there would be important men that would come over, and there was this one man who came over and sat in the back pew, and he would learn, and he was this financier. He would do his best to learn, and his name was William Wilberforce. William Wilberforce was a man who came to know God and was the reason and the one who fought for abolition of slavery, that slavery would end. He was an incredible Christian man. His writings are all over the place in England. He is revered for those who are in England. And so what I want you to understand is this is already changing. The world is changing. I actually had all the different times of when every single country, and we are one of the last countries that abolishes slavery. And it's because it had such a hold of our commerce, had such a hold of the way our money was handled. So if we lose our slaves, we lose our money. If we lose our slaves, we won't be able to make it, and those plantation owners might have to actually, not make as much money as they have. And so this is kind of the world that, and I want you to think about it, this is the world where some of your great-grandparents grew up in. This is the world they grew up in. And and I want you to think about it, this kind of racism or even this kind of thought toward even, because what makes, when you really sit this, and gosh, there's such a good book over here about this exact topic, and it's these two books right here, this one right here, both of them by the same man, Mark Knoll. This right here is The Civil War as a Theological Crisis, and this one right here is God, Race, and the American Politics. Both of these books, what makes it so is he explains, especially in the Civil War one, he explains how pastors tried their best to explain to their congregation of why slavery was okay. He would explain, like, this is what they said, this is how they said it, and this is how they tried to promote, because there's slavery in the Bible, and it's okay for us to have slaves here. The slavery that's in the Bible is slavery of all kinds of people. But the American slavery is one kind of person. It's so specific. It's any black man. And that man would have to be freed, and if he came back to the South, he could be taken again. It's different. It's just the way it's different. And the torture, the Bible talks about how you should treat your slaves well and do these things, but yet that's not how it was done in the South. And so for this Bible-believing, Jesus-proclaiming area, they had a giant piece of wood in their eye. And it really does become, listen to me, it is a mark. But it's not a mark that you and I have to hold. I do believe it's a giant mark in the past. And either we live in this victim mentality where it's always going to be this thing that we bring up, or we have to take the next step forward. And I think the way the world is built now, and especially the media, that's why they always want to keep racism alive. Is so they can always have this victim mentality. They can be able to pull and sway votes, especially when that doesn't make any sense whatsoever. These were all Democrats, by the way. I'm right too, right? These were not Republicans. These were Republicans. And it's funny how it got flipped. That blows my mind. It always blows my mind. It's like, read a book, and I promise you'll see how it changes. These are amazing photographs. These are some of the first photographs. There's about 20 of these photos that actually still exist. I couldn't put them all on here, but I think some of them are absolutely amazing. That when the first ability to actually have photograph like pictures, or there are pictures that are of people picking cotton and taking things. I find that so stinking fascinating. I don't know about you, but I do. Next thing, the North. The North does change, how, especially before this. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm supposed to do pastors in public life. So in the South, communities and pastors were among the most educated and most influential men in town. They gave Christianity a strong role in the community life, but not always a strong theological foundation. They often served sources of news. So, like I said last week, people would come to church to get their news, like news on what was happening in Washington, what was happening in the state, what was happening in how things changed in life. So I want you to think about it. If America, it doesn't have this media that it has now, and it's all held by this pastor, well, no offense, but some pastors are absolutely wicked. I mean, some pastors are so, like, they have an agenda, just like the media. And when they get to say it from their mouth, if they're trying to rally troops maybe for the Civil War, or man, we got to fight against this, they're trying to take all of our money, they're trying to take all of our resources. And this is really where it starts to unwind. Pastors were the ones that actually. So you already have these pastors that are been built by revivalism, built by shallow theology, and now they have, and what's wild too, in my office, there is an 1850 seminary book, and it's how to teach theology on the Western Front. And it's a book, it's about this big. And I haven't read it, but I think it's crazy to think all they needed was that book and their Bible, and they basically were like, okay, I'm ready to go and start a church in Garrison, Texas. And that's really how it started. And that's how it was. And so I find that stuff amazing. Yeah, look at the next one. It says, because there were many evangelists and few settled pastors, revivals spread faster than church maturity. Think about that. There's so many revivals, so now you have this revival culture. You have this walk an aisle, make a decision, create a church, because this is what they did, is that as they went from east to west in America, they stopped at a town, had a revival, maybe stayed there for a week or two, maybe even a month, and they moved on to the next place. And the pastors would either maybe educate as much as they could, but how much can you really educate in a week? How much can you educate maybe even in a month? Then you move on to the next place, you do it all over again, then you move on to the next place. So what you're doing is you're creating maybe more converts, but very shallow converts. Because even for us, if I say someone becomes a believer tomorrow in this room and say, okay, you're ready to teach Sunday school class, you're ready to go up there and teach these things, technically that's exactly how it was. We were pushing this, we were just trying to get from East Coast to West Coast, create as many conversions, try to create as many towns as we could, and this is what the result of these things were. So when you think about this, these pastors sometimes were also looked as they walked into town, as this moral figure that was perfect in every way. To be honest with you, most of them were very, very, very much drunks. They actually drank a whole lot. They actually struggled when it came down to morality. Again, remember, this is the Wild West. It wouldn't be, gosh, I can't remember how many times you've seen, even in all kinds of Westerns, you see that one of the pastors are sitting there, playing poker at the poker, thing. Again, I don't care. But I think what we do is that they have the idea, and I've met people, even in this culture that we live in, that the pastor can say and do no wrong. Because the pastor's the pastor, and whatever he says, that's what goes. Absolutely not. He is a valuable man. He should be humble. He should be a man who's saying, I'm broken and I need help just as much as anyone else does, right? Like, if he leads from humility and a servant leadership, not out of a leadership of, follow me, I got everything right, I'll tell you what to do, and this is what you do, and don't ever question anything I say. And so, again, we're not talking about, think about this, what they're not doing is how to set up a church. Because you remember, that was what was crazy. Think about when we talk about the Reformation. It was all about, we want to do church, and we want to do it this way, and we want to be able to preach our sermons, and we want to be able to create our kind of government, and we want to be able to be congregationally led. Yet they knew what they were talking about, because they were hungry for the word. We get this, they're hungry for a show and conversions. And every one of us grew up in churches where we judged the success of a sermon off how many people walked the aisle. How many people walked up and prayed at the front? How many people, were crying at the front of the thing? And here's the thing. I'm not saying any of that stuff's bad. But that's sometimes the mindset that we lived in. And I'm not saying again, it's not bad. But if it's not real, because here's what's funny. We can have people, Bobby and I have talked about this 100 times, we can have people walking out. It'll be the same person that walks the aisle. It'll be the same person that comes up to the front and prays. It'll be the same person that comes and asks for this. It'll be just that same thing over and over and over. Why? Because they love to go up in front. Again, if you've heard me pray even at the end of the sermons, think about it. What do I say? You come pray with me if you want to, but what I'd really rather you do is I'd rather you pray with the person who invited you. Pray with the person you come with. And if you don't know what to do, then come with me. Come to me. It's not that I'm trying to shun them off as much as I want them to understand. The person who's sitting beside you is just as close to Jesus as I am. Is a sinner just like me. Struggles just like me. Maybe he doesn't know what to say. Maybe you have a theological question. I get it. You come ask me a question. But when it comes down to it, the level of how we hold pastors at, and listen to me, that's going to go into the 19th century. Ooh, it's going to make a big old mess. It's going to make a big old mess. And that's the mess we're in now. And so now you think about it, we have these mega churches. We have these men who are almost more strong. Even their name's higher and bigger than even their church's name. You know why? Because the tower that they're building is a Babel that I don't know of. It's completely the opposite. Okay, so let's look at the North. The North, it was changing, it was rapidly, it was immigration. Now, I want you to hear me say this. This is such a hot topic in today's world. I think we should have secure borders, I think all these things, but to also believe that we're a country that is founded off of nothing but white men, or even men like you, so I think sometimes is how people make it put, well, you shouldn't be here. You get some really biggity kind of stuff here, okay? So be real careful. We all come from different backgrounds. Some of you come from backgrounds that maybe you don't. Maybe your family was the immigrant. Maybe it wasn't. I don't know. But I guarantee at one time, somebody in your family came over here, okay? So in a way, they would say that we're all a country of immigrants. Now, I believe that there's a way, if I went to another country, even today, and I said, hey, I'm going to go live in Greece, I would go through the proper proceedings. Do I think you should come over here illegally? No, I don't. So before we get into this, don't get some hot topic questions here, okay? Because a lot of people get all huffy-puffy about this one topic. Right there, look, new immigration communities. Oh, I'm sorry. The new people means new ideas and new thoughts. This is what brought, the immigration is really what brought the idea that slavery should be abolished. So, and so think about it. When you have new people with new ideas, new thoughts, new backgrounds, they're going to influence our ideas, our thoughts, and our background. Now, we're here in Texas, and we're worried about all these people coming from California and saying, hey, you can come to Texas, but don't vote like you did in there. So we already kind of have that influx now. But I want you to think about it. Then you think about, this is America, but I really want you to think about it. What was America then? It was trying to find its own identity. It had no idea what it was. This is why I think it'd be so cool to be able to go back to New York City at this time and go to the real Chinatown, to go to the real Little Italy where the Italians lived, maybe before the mafia. But, things like this that would happen, because I think this would be a lot of, you would see the cultures, you would see where they would be. The Irish Catholic influence is really, you remember that room that made it all purple, that whole Catholicism? That's Irish Catholics. They were a force to reckon with, especially at the time. Read a book about Irish Catholics. I say that because my neighbor was an author when I was a kid growing up, and he was an Irish Catholic turned Mennonite, and I was like, I don't know how that happened, but okay, yeah. So it blew my mind. So new immigrant communities brought different languages, customs, and religious traditions. And again, this is going to bring things that were even theistic, polytheistic, because like I said, when America was founded, it was mainly just theism and not going to be atheistic. And then as we start to have some changes. They're going to have the effects of the Enlightenment, affects the way people were taught maybe even in Europe, and then how they bring those ideas over to America. That made the North more diverse and more complex religiously than much of the South. As you see, there's just difference. Like, what's the difference between the Bible Belt and up north? For those who've ever been to Oregon or to Washington, how did that happen? And you go to these places, there's not a church on every corner. You passed 8 to get here, right? That's a Bible Belt. There's just a church. If someone gets mad in here, he'll start another church too again. That's how this church started, right? Because I don't know why we do that. We would rather start a new church than actually to revitalize any church. Why? You want to know why revitalization is the hardest thing to do? Because no church wants to change. When a church gets set in their ways, we don't change for nothing. People die, they have to change, right? And so these are the things that kind of do happen over time. The next one, for example, in the 1800s, the North became increasingly shaped by immigration, especially the Irish Catholic migration, which Catholicism was much more visible after that in the northern cities. The North and the South, therefore, developed different religious cultures in the same century. If you've ever seen the movie Gangs in New York, and I'm not advertising that movie because it's got a lot of bad words, but the premise of all the different cultures coming from all the different things, I think it's a great painting of how New York City and a lot of those places were up there in the North. And so, because everyone's coming from a different background. So what happened was that in the North, with all these influxes, all this thing, the idea that we should abolish slavery, this then create the tensions between North and South. And this tension just keeps on rising up and up and up and up and up. And you can just see how it's almost going to divide, and then it finally does divide, which then creates the Civil War. The Civil War is just incredible when you think about it. You've probably heard the stories, like they used to, they actually had a ceasefire multiple times. And they would celebrate like Christian holidays like Christmas, Easter, and things like that. Like it would be like, hey, tomorrow's Easter, we're not fighting tomorrow. That's really beautiful. It's really, really beautiful to think about how it was done this way. Like a lot of art was drawn about for the idea that how these men were clinging to this. Again, these are probably, most of them are probably very shallow Christians. And I kind of want you to think about this. Like when you look at a picture, these aren't real pictures, but this is like a real picture. And I think about this all the time. Like even when you look at, like if you go to, I don't know, you go to a ball game, and you look at this whole crowd of people, and you go, I wonder how many of these people really know Jesus. I mean, love Jesus, know God. And there's a part of you that should sit there and think to yourself, what if it's just 5? That's awesome. But we have a lot of work to do, right? When I look at these old pictures, I always think to myself going, man, these men were probably listening to that man as if like, I need this. Like I might die tomorrow. I need this. And I think this one, you imagine just some boy that's there listening to this, and he is just captivated by this man talking of God, this Savior, this Jesus, this. And I don't know, like I think that pure belief, that help my own belief, that belief like the thief at the cross, like that kind of belief, I really believe that's really what cements really good belief and good faith. And I don't know, I always think about these, when I look at old pictures of real pictures, I really get kind of heartbroken. And I think, I hope they really are believers. I really hope that they did have this. Because think about it, this is what they were doing tomorrow, This is silly, by the way. It should be Jefferson Davis. Anyway, yeah. All right, so the next thing, what came from this? Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't even read the paper. The Civil War, let's go back to the Civil War. The Civil War disrupted American religion and exposed deep moral divisions. So again, as the South is saying it's okay for these things, especially to John and I were talking about last week, is the idea of that we're all men created equal. Well, in this time, were they? No. Even women were not allowed to vote. But there's a history behind that too. If you want to go read that, we have been sold a bill of goods on all of that women history. But I would love to explain that to you one day, but I don't have time. White Southern Christians often saw the war through the lenses of home, region, and slavery. Northern Christians were often interrupted the war in terms of abolition and national judgment. The war weakened churches, but also forced Americans to confront the moral meaning of slavery. and building unity around money or commerce over the morality of all men were created equal. So if you think about it, they had this giant revivals to create people more moral. Well, they're more moral, but can you imagine being a person who's a slave owner who says, okay, we're supposed to be moral, we're supposed to treat everybody this way, you're not supposed to hit, you're not supposed to be violent, you're not supposed to do these things. Well, what about our slaves, Dad? They don't count. They don't count. You see how this moral dilemma starts to really question the idea of, like, are these all God's created people? You'll get a lot of weird theology that comes from that too, where the black race would be considered even a lower class or even a lower, had less dignity to God than a white man, which is, insanity. That's not in the Bible. They would create a theology called the Cushites. And they would say that all through the Cushites, where that happened, that's where the black race come from. And those are the people who were cast out, and those are the people who were stained, and that's why they were black, because they were stained by their sin. And that's what, and it's an absolute mess. There's a church really close to right here that believes in that, still to this day. Faith of the faith of the enslaved people. The people, while they were enslaved people had their own faith in God and Jesus. Their Christianity was not just simply copied from the Southern religion. Some slave owners, now this is true, I've seen this Bible, some slave owners passed out the slave Bible, which distorted the version of the scriptures designed to keep enslaved people obedient. But even in the face of this manipulation, many enslaved men and women came to trust God as their true deliverer. Many drew deeply from biblical themes like deliverance, suffering, judgment, and hope. And their faith was expressed through prayer, spiritual songs, endurance, and hope under oppression. After the emancipation, black churches became a major center for worship, leadership, and community life. I always say this, when you're looking into black churches, the denominations are always kind of hard to explain, because they are. I've even asked black pastors to explain them, and they'll go, I don't know. It's different based on church to church. To be honest with you, they're the same way. I mean, we could have 4 Baptist churches, and they're all completely different, okay? So let's not get crazy, okay? But when it came down to this, there were men who, they studied their Bible, they lived off their Bible, they loved their Bible, and this came from this black church. I love it. I love hearing Dietrich Bonhoeffer talk about how the greatest thing that he ever learned was from a black church in New York City. He took this back and tried to explain it to Germany and during the Nazi time period in the 1940s. It's a beautiful, beautiful story. We'll talk a little bit about that next week. But this is what the slave Bible looked like. It was the Holy Bible for the, I can't see that word, blank, of the Negro slaves. And so this was made, you can see it was printed in London. It was made 1807, and so this is kind of their version. But you think about it, what was really the hardest part is this is the idea of family. Because at any moment, a family can be taken apart, and it can be sold. And so the way you would just keep people imprisoned is you just take away the things that are most precious to them, and you would take away their family. And so that would be the goal. So that's what it means by, think about enslavement. I think we kind of like want to gloss across it. But if you were to tie it into a sermon, we're still slaves today. Like, you're a slave to your sin. You're a slave to maybe even your ideas, because you maybe won't change or won't be different, or don't want God to grow you. You want to just stay who you are. Last section. This is the most fun section. I don't know why I made it last. The last section. These are the things that came out of it. There's different new sects that came out of it. Now, I want to say these two right here are Christian. These right here are these are denominations in our Christianity. This is the Church of Christ. So many of you come from a background of Church of Christ. I don't want to hear your opinions about it, because you love to tell them to me. This is the Christian church, the disciples of Christ. And these two would be good foundations of Christianity. The rest of them are not. So think about it. What happens when you have the Charles Finney, how to have a revival, how to have thin theology, but yet really no one grows deep in theology? Then you have men who are reading the Bible and then completely taking it out of context. Not taking historical theology, not taking anything that the people taught in the past. Instead, they make up their own ideas, their own plan, and this is what it means. What you create is cults. We still have cults today. Jehovah's Witnesses is a cult. They take the gospel and they change it. Mormons, they take the gospel, they twist it, and they change it. If they change the core of Christianity, like the Bible is inerrant, the Trinity, who Jesus is, who God is, what sin is, all these ideas, these things that we teach you so much, you will leave Christianity and you will then dive into these areas over here. You will have Church of Christ. Church of Christ is going to be exclusivist. Exclusivists believe that most of the time they believe that they're the only ones who are Christians who are going to heaven. That's an exclusivist, okay? Baptists have that too. They're called landmark Baptists. Landmarkism is saying that they're the only ones who are going to heaven as well. So we have that too. So trust me, they're not the only ones who do. They do have the instrument thing and all that stuff like that. I don't understand how they get it. Disciples of Christ, it's honestly, this church is based on which church you were talking about. Every one of them are different. The one in Nacogdoches is nothing like any First Christian church I've ever seen. So it's totally different. Seventh-day Adventists, they're going to be the ones that have the strict diets. They do distort parts of the Bible. They do distort parts of the theology, especially Trinity. Okay. If I was to have to pick one, this is the one I'd pick, but I don't want to pick any of them. Today at lunch, I sat by Mormons. I sat by two guys dressed just like that, had that name tag, had that Book of Mormon in their hands, and they were sitting there reading it. And I sat right by them. I love it. I mean, it's a ball for me. I mean, it's a great time for me. I love sitting as close as I can to them and almost make them feel like, ask me. Just please ask me a question. And I'd say hi to them, say, hey, what's your name? Anyway, it's a great time for me. Taylor's worse than me. Then we have Jehovah's Witnesses. If you've ever seen them set up, I was at the base of the Parthenon in Greece, and these people were out just like this. They had this, they had this. There was someone standing there, and I want to say they had an umbrella, and that person was standing there. This is their setup. Completely a different type of religion. This one's funny is that this one's built through a magazine subscription. When magazines were actually like the brand new back in the early, like mid 1800s, it all came through the Watchtower, and that's what happened here. This is Millerites. This is where this comes from. I can explain that different time. And then, of course, this is Joseph Smith. Beautiful, isn't he? They make him pretty. He was a rapist, thief, and a convicted felon multiple times. Sees a crystal in the middle of the woods in Missouri, figures out that that's where heaven is and the entrance into heaven. He puts it into a hat. He puts his head into a hat, and he sees what the scriptures told him, and it says he needs to go and marry all these people. And then they basically kick him out of town. He goes and tells more people, and then he goes down, and he messed up his own sayings multiple times. Like, he said it said this, and then when he went back and looked at the hat again, he said it said almost the exact opposite of what he said. So he was an absolute charlatan in the way he taught those things. And so Mormonism is probably the biggest cult that we deal with it's in our town. It's definitely something that we need to be paying attention to. I would love for them to talk to my daughter, Claire, because Claire will wear them out. But these are just people you think about it. Like, are your kids ready to have this person come talk to them at university? Because they're going to. SFA, no joke. I'll be standing there right in front of the UC. My college students, they're there. They are there. These Jehovah's Witness people, they stand out there with these little deals. So you think about this. This is something that we come in contact with. It's just, do you choose to see it? Do you choose not to see it? And so all of this stuff came out of the Second Great Awakening. All of this stuff came out of theology going so fast from East Coast to West Coast. And it's mainly just bad theology. It's bad people teaching you. So the question really is this: why did this happen? Because people wanted to be evangelists and not pastors. What's a pastor? I would love for this just to be a sermon series. What's a pastor? A pastor is someone who is there with you, who shepherds you on day to day, and changes that happen in life. Like when you get sick or get hurt, and that's easy. Like that's going to the hospital, checking on you. Maybe when your mom dies, or maybe people doing funerals. Because if you look at the description of when you look at a church's description of what a pastor does, sometimes it's so silly of what it says. It says, be there at all the funerals, at all the marriages, at all these things, at this and this and this. And that's what a pastor is a person who brings change on a daily basis, weekly basis, and explains the Bible. And listen to me, you're not going to like it. That's why I always say that everyone has a little piece of them that hates their pastors. Because you don't want to change. You don't want to do anything different than you used to do. And you don't want anyone preaching a gospel that might say and start calling out the sin that you so dearly love. But then when you realize that it's like, this is the word of God. And so when you hear us preach, you should never hear us preach like, this is my sermon to you, where it's hellfire and brimstone. You better hurry, turn or burn. You should hear it as a humble person saying, this is what the scriptures say. And either we believe it or we don't. We call ourselves Christians. We call this our book. We call this the Word of God. Do we believe it and do we live it? It's the Word of God that constantly is changing us. And it slowly just goes over us each and every day. So this next week, it'll be John the Baptist. John the Baptist's main entire sermon was all about repent, you sinners. That's the same thing Jesus said, which will lead us to communion. So you think about this. It's the same thing each and every week. Sermon after that is Jesus' temptation with Satan in the desert. It's easy. Think about how that changes us. That's the things that should change us. It shouldn't be because Clint went up there and gave a really good sermon. No, the scripture is really that good. Like this stuff's alive. This is the living word of God. And it's changing us slowly. That's what a pastor does. Let me pray. God, thank you so much for the grace and mercy you show us. God, thank you so much for just the history that we have, even in this room. That God, this 18th century, God, this really has made what has all of our opinion of either what a good church or even a bad church or even like way we grew up or even how we've been shaped and molded. God, these are the things that have made us. And God, I pray, Lord, that we can understand that it's sometimes messy, especially in the Civil War or even slavery. And if we were not being committed to the scriptures and teaching what is in the historical accounts of theology, God, that maybe we'll get off base. We'll start teaching heresy. God, I pray, Lord, you keep us from that. I pray, Lord, that we stay committed to your word and we hunger for it. God, I pray, Lord, that always stays even with me and with our pastors here at this church. As we understand it's not our message, but it's your message each and every day. God, that we are led by Christ and Christ alone. In your name we pray. Amen. Thank you, guys. Have a great week.